Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Welcome to our CWI Nampa campus and our Nampa campus academic building. Welcome to students, faculty, and members of the community that came to join tonight. I'm very pleased to have you. I'm going to let Professor Nikki Garrell introduce our guest speaker, Mr. Darren Perry. I just also wanted to thank him for coming as well, though, and thanks for his leadership and inspiration in helping us remember and share important local history, U.S. history, and history of Indigenous peoples from this area. So,
welcome, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Vance. Welcome to this event, History, Healing, and Restoration. I want to extend a warm welcome to Darren Perry from the Northwestern Band of the Shoshone. He comes to us from Logan, Utah, so we really appreciate him making that trek, and we're really happy that the weather gods were on our side. I was privileged to go to the Idaho Heritage Conference with Dr. Vance over in Pocatello in September, and that's where we first became acquainted with Mr. Perry. And then I happened to go to the Boise City Hall's Fettuccine Forum in November and got to see this same presentation. And I was just so moved both times. It became both of our goals to see what we could do to bring Mr. Perry to campus and bring this story of the Bear River Massacre and everything that's being done to commemorate it, honor it, and sort of take the land and everything that's happened on that land into a new place in the 21st century. So I am really excited that y'all are here and are taking part in this. And it was so amazing how many emails I got from random community members asking if there was going to be a recording. Yes, there is going to be a recording. Thank you for allowing us to record. So this will be available. If there's anybody that you know that wasn't able to come, it will be available at a later date. And so we're really excited to be able to have that opportunity to share this important story with as many people as possible. So with that, I'd like to welcome Darren Perry.
Two reasons why you're here. Free food. Your professors coerced you into coming tonight. Either way, that's okay. But I hope when you leave tonight, you have a different feeling. And I hope you listen with your heart. Shoshones are storytellers. My good brother and I have been sharing our cultures together. We just met, but that's who we are. When you tell stories, you touch people here and not so much here, but that's where learning takes place. I want you to know that American history for a long time was written and taught as this single story. It was a narrative of nation building that united its participants into this single American experience, the great American story. It was a success story based on principles of liberty and equality for all. I'm still patiently waiting for that part to happen. In years past, historians have sometimes ignored or dismissed people, groups whose experiences didn't conform to that master narrative, and often dismissed were the experiences of the American Indian, and may I say other marginalized groups. After all, our story is one of suffering and decline, and rather than one of progress or happiness. But times change, and the history and the stories that we tell about the past changes too. I have come to realize over a lifetime, somebody called me an elder the other day, and I didn't know how to feel about that. Because like I'm 25 inside. I thought, my goodness, where has time gone? I'm an elder? And I've come to realize over this long lifetime of mine that when we reduce history to just data and facts and figures, and when we remove the storytelling side or the emotional side of history, we lose some of the humanity that makes history so important. And I think that's why the Native American experience is so important. If you were to drive today, like I did, along Highway 91, just past Preston, Idaho, heading north, you'll round a curve that opens up to a beautiful panoramic view of the Bear River bottomlands below. If you know where to look, you can see the steam rising from the edges. 160 years ago, just this past January 29th, it was at this exact spot that some 700 members of my Shoshone people were camped, as they had always done. Nearby hot springs provided them with a place to catch their breath, to catch up with family and friends, to heal, to take time off. We called that place Moso Dugwani, which means home of the lungs. A half a mile to the east, Colonel Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers, 220 of them from Camp Douglas, Utah, had the same bird's eye view on that cold January morning. When something terrible happens, think about this, where human lives are lost, those places seem to always take on a different meaning. Let me just say the 14.6 acres of the World Trade Centers, the beaches of Normandy, a homemade memorial at the side of the road where a fatal traffic accident occurred. These are places that haunt and hurt for the wounds that they hold. But they still compel us to go back for some unexplainable comfort. Have you ever had a memory sneak out of your eye and roll down your cheek? I have that all the time when I think about the massacre of my people. For thousands of years, tribal elders would sit down with the children to tell them stories. You see, the stories were always the same. There was never a word out of place. It had to be that way. It had to be accurate. Our children needed to hear the stories as the elders had heard the stories. Because in our culture, nothing was ever written down. I went through this same process with my beautiful grandmother, May Timbimbu. She'd sit for hours and tell me stories about how the coyote stole fire, how the bald eagle became bald, or how the porcupine became greedy. And then with reverence in her tone and sometimes a tear in her eyes, she would relate the story of the massacre of Boa Ogoi, which means big river. There's an old Indian saying that I love, and that says, when an old Indian dies, a library burns. And that was never as true as it was about my grandmother. As I grew older and I attended school, I developed this great love for history. She turned me into a history geek, for heck's sakes. Sitting in class one day, I realized something. None of the stories that my grandmother told me were in our history books. How could that be? I had always believed that historical events were an absolute. I believed that events that transpired over time had only one conclusion. But as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that history is about perspective. Whose perspective? And then one day it became clear to me when I heard a quote attributed to Winston Churchill, great English leader. He said that history is only written by the victors. Well, that makes perfect sense then, why our histories, this Native American history, is never written. My great-great-great-grandfather was Chief Sagwitch. He and his people lived like the Shoshones had lived for thousands of years. We were hunters and gatherers. We traveled with the changing seasons. We looked upon the earth as not just a place to live, but something so sacred and special that we called her mother. She was always the provider of our livelihoods. We refer to ourselves as Niwa, which means the people. You see, to the native people, the mountains and the streams and the plains stand forever, and seasons walk around annually. We traveled to different areas of this beautiful country when the seeds and berries were abundant and the game was plentiful. If you can imagine, though, it was probably a hard way of life. I'm sure our people were never more than a couple of days away from starvation. But it was a happy life. Back then, every member of the tribe played an important role in its survival. Family relationship is sacred, as it should be to you and your family. In the summer of 1847, Sagwitch received word from a group of other Shoshones that there was a group of white settlers making their way through Wyoming and heading towards the Salt Lake Valley. On July 31st, Sagwitch and 10 of his men traveled to Salt Lake City and met with a man named Brigham Young and the first group of pioneers. They didn't meet with Brigham Young that day. They instead met with a man named Heber C Kimball, a church leader. At the end of that meeting, Heber C Kimball said this: "You do not own the land. The land belongs to our Heavenly Father, and we are here to plow and plant it." You can imagine, within months, disputes started to arise with the Shoshone and the pioneers over what my grandmother called the payment of rent. Sagwitch's life, which was probably hard, was now going to get more complicated. Over the next few years, as more and more saints arrived to that beautiful valley, good land was now becoming scarce. In 1855, Brigham Young sent a man named Peter Mon north to the Cache Valley to settle it for good, where I live today. Not long after that, the next years, more and more saints arrived to that beautiful valley. In those early days, Peter Mon and his people called the Shoshones and Sagwitch's people the friendly ones. As more and more saints arrived to that beautiful valley, the saints then changed their tune and began to describe my people as thieves and beggars, which was probably true from their perspective. You know, the irony, though, for me, is that the saints themselves had suffered so much hate and injustice on their trek across this country. It's hard for me to believe that they could be found guilty of doing the same thing to my people. Peter Mon, who is now the area authority in the Cache Valley, said this: "With extraordinarily good luck, the California Volunteers will completely wipe them out. We wish this community rid of all such parties. And if Colonel Connor can be successful in reaching that bastard class of humans who play with the lives of the peaceable and the law-abiding citizens in this way, we shall be pleased to acknowledge our obligations." So with that development, the use of the California and Oregon trails that cut through the heart of Shoshone land, I think our people had three options: beg for food, starve, or steal. You now have two different groups of people living two different lifestyles. In early January of 1863, the Mormon settlers from Cache Valley and some miners using the California and Oregon trails began writing letters to Salt Lake City for someone to come take care of the Indian depredations. Arrest warrants were issued by a federal judge in Salt Lake for the chiefs, Chief Sagwitch, Bear Hunter, and Pocatello. Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers were now mustered into service. A Mormon scout named Porter Rockwell, who served as a guide, led Connor and his men just north of where I live today, north of Logan, Utah, near Preston, Idaho, where Battle Creek meets Boa Ogoi, or what we call the Bear River. Sagwitch, being an early riser, got up as usual on the morning of the 29th. He surveyed the area around his camp. He noticed when he left his teepee that there was a mist on the hill to his southeast. That mist started creeping down the hill, and he realized what was taking place. The troops from Camp Douglas had arrived. It was 4 feet of snow, 0-degree temperatures. The horses had been traveling all night, and they were sweating and lathered up, and every time they breathed, the steam would come out. The chief wasn't surprised. He quickly gathered his people. They gathered whatever weapons they had to fight with. Bows, arrows, spears. I'm sure some of the men had old style rifles, but very few bullets. My grandmother said some of our women were picking at their woven windwing pans to use them for shields. Without so much as asking for the chiefs, Connor and his men began to fire their rifles and sidearms at my people. The soldiers massacred men, women, and children. My grandmother said our people were being slaughtered like wild rabbits. The massacre started early in the morning and lasted until early afternoon. The Bear River, which was slightly frozen sometimes earlier, was now starting to flow. Our people were jumping into the river, if you can imagine, to try to escape. The blazing white snow was now brilliant red with blood. The willow trees that were used as hiding places were now bent down as if in defeat. Many of our women were running with their infants to the river. One woman named Angie Chi. She was a brand new mom, a young mother, had her newborn baby. She told of being chased by the soldiers and jumping into the river. Now you might ask yourselves how they could jump into this cold river in January in the Cache Valley, and it's because of the many hot springs that are along the river. She jumped into the river near a hot spring and where there was an overhanging bank. She knew she could go there for safety. When she got there, she found herself there with 10 other women who had had the same idea. Angie Chi lived to be more than 100 years old and would often tell the children this story at Washakie, the old Indian community where our people went after the massacre. She would tell the children as they gathered around and talk about her 7 bullet wounds that she'd already had to her own body and show them. She also told of having to drown her own baby as it started to cry. And she didn't want to expose the rest of the women. Many of our people were urging the chief and others to escape. Many did, but most of them met their fate that day on the battlefield. Angie Chi lived to be more than 100 years old, and she would often relate this story to anybody who would listen. The cruelest killing, though, was that of Bear Hunter. Knowing that he was one of the chiefs, they had captured him, they'd shot him and stabbed him and tortured him in many ways. Through all of that, the old chief wouldn't die. But not only that, he wouldn't even cry out for mercy, make a sound. Because of that, the military became frustrated and angry. One of the men took his bayonet to a fire. They heated that hot piece of metal in the fire until it was glowing red. They then ran that hot piece of metal through that chief's head from ear to ear. Bear Hunter went to his grave a man of honor, and he left behind a wife and many small children. At the end of the massacre, Connor allowed a handful of Mormon settlers who had watched. He allowed them to walk over the killing field. James Martineau was sickened by what he saw. In his journal, he said that many of the squaws were killed because they would not lie down and submit to be ravished. He later told Peter Mon about sickening accounts of inhuman acts by the soldiers. He said after the Indians had been routed, they killed almost every one of the wounded by hitting them in the head with an axe. The next morning, Brigham Young sent 3 local settlers from Franklin, William Head, William Nelson, and William Hull, to count the dead and to look for survivors. Hull recorded in his journal, "We drove our sleighs as far as the river. The first sight to greet us was an old Indian man walking, head bowed, lamenting the dead. He didn't speak to us, and he soon left walking towards the north. And then he said, 'Never will I forget the scene. Dead bodies were everywhere. I counted 8 deep in one place, and in several places there were 3 to 5 deep. All in all, the 4 of us independently counted more than 400 dead. 2/3 of that number being women and children. We found 2 Indian women alive whose thighs had been broken by bullets. We found 2 little boys and 1 little girl who looked to be about the age of 3. The little girl was badly wounded, having received 8 bullet wounds to her tiny body. We took them on our horses to the sleigh that made them as comfortable as possible. At this time, I can't help but believe that Sagwitch, who had escaped, was now realizing that he indeed lived in 2 different worlds. One group was greedy, wanted everything, wanted the land, and felt it was their God-given right to have it. The other group only wanted to live and travel as they had done for millennia. One group made their wishes and dreams come true by making themselves the conqueror at the expense of a defenseless people who only wanted to be left alone. Ralph Smith, another Franklin area settler, summed up the sentiments of the local pioneers when he said this: "We looked upon the massacre as gruesome, but necessary." And then added, "The work of Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers was nothing less than an intervention from our Heavenly Father." Mary Ann Weston Mon, wife of Peter Mon, wrote in her journal, "The residents of Cache Valley regarded Connor's efforts as an imposition of providence in our behalf, and commented that the Indians had been a source of great annoyance to us for a very long time." Henry Ballard, Bishop of the Logan First Ward, said in his journal, "This put a quietus upon the Indians, The Lord raised up his foe in Colonel Connor to punish them without us having to do it. We had bore a great deal from them, and yet we had been feeding them, and yet some of the wicked spirits among them would stir up trouble against us. George Farrell, secretary of the Logan Second Ward, in the church's official minutes, recorded, "We looked upon the movement of Connor as an intervention from the Almighty God, as the Indians had been a source of great annoyance to us for a very long time." And finally, in a letter dated February 4th, from Peter Mon to Brigham Young, Peter Mon said, "I feel my skirts rid of their blood. They rejected the way of life and salvation, which had been pointed out to them from time to time. And thus they have perished, relying upon their own strength and wisdom." Just north of Preston, Idaho today, you'll find an old monument on the side of the road, just off of Highway 91. This monument was erected in 1932 by the good people of Franklin County. It was said in the official minutes that the monument was put on the site where it was said that you could walk on dead bodies for a quarter mile without touching the ground. That monument was erected to tell the story of what happened that day. It was a celebrated event. The whole community came together, scout groups, politicians, church leaders. Our people were invited to unveil it. The whole community came together to celebrate their public histories and their ancestors' achievements, and to tell the story of what happened. What the monument really did for me is that it gave people a reason to forget. That monument strips us of our obligation to find out for ourselves what took place. And that monument tells us how it wants the past to be remembered. You see, we as human beings have great memories for what we want to remember. In commemorating a battle, you tend to forget the uglier parts of history. And you focus on the heroism of the soldier and the saint. And that's the kind of Daughters of Utah Pioneers monument that exists there today. But you know what? That narrative now becomes the story. It's not a story about my people and who died. It becomes a story about the brave soldiers and the pioneer women who took care of them. In constructing a monument like this, you firm up memory and you create a false history. You decide. The plaque on the monument reads, "Attacks by the Indians on the peaceful inhabitants in this vicinity led to the final battle here on January 29th in 1863. The conflict occurred in bitter cold, deep snow. Scores of wounded soldiers were taken from the battlefield to the Latter-day Saint community of Franklin, Idaho. Here, pioneer women, trained through trials and necessities of frontier living, accepted the responsibility of caring for the wounded until they could be removed to Camp Douglas, Utah. 2 Indian women found alive after the encounter were given homes in Franklin. So my question to you is that really what happened? The problem with that narrative, among many, is that it really gives us one generation's perspective. 69 years after the actual event. It's like a view from a small window that has been carefully placed to exclude a whole quadrant of a beautiful landscape. You only get to see what they want you to see. It reinforces the view that Indians were savages. And it tells us the violence on the frontier was necessary for the survival of Mormon communities. And it would show what the consequences would be if both groups tried to share the same space. You know, next to that monument, there's an old tree. It's an old Russian olive, mature Russian olive. I call it the honor tree. People leave things in it. Dream catchers or ribbons, teddy bears, all kinds of things are hanging in this tree. And every time I go, there's something new. And the people that leave it are the only ones who know really the reason they left it. Otherwise, but they're honoring the dead. I love that tree. I was there with a group of fourth graders not long ago, 70 of them. We were staring at the tree and a boy noticed a mirror hanging in the tree. The boy said to me, "I see a mirror hanging in the tree. What do you think that means?" Well, I had no idea. I was frantically trying to come up with something clever to tell him. And then a young little girl standing to my left bailed me out. She said, "I know why that mirror is there." This is a fourth grader. I said, "Why? What do you think?" She said, "It's here to remind us that we did this. And we could do it again if we don't learn from our past mistakes." Man, the hair on my head stood up. I looked over at her teacher, and we were taught by a fourth grader that day. What if the plaque had been written from the perspective of the Shoshones? What do you think that would have said? Maybe it would have said something like this: "The massacre of the Northwestern Band of Shoshone Nation occurred in this vicinity on January 29th, 1863. Colonel Patrick Edward Connor and his California volunteers from Camp Douglas, Utah, attacked a sleeping Indian village in the early morning hours of the day. The soldiers shot, raped, bludgeoned, and bayoneted several hundred Shoshones to their death. The Shoshones fought back with the limited weapons available to them, but the band was all but annihilated. So my question is, which version of the massacre is correct? The answer will always lie in your perspective. You know, the events that took place on that cold January day have long been forgotten by most. Maybe guilt or remorse has silenced all those who one day may have wanted to know the truth. But I believe there's a new generation, you students' generation, that you really have a desire to listen and to learn. Let me tell you, it's not because we as a tribe are looking to have things made right. We're not. But I believe that those who died at Bear River that day have a God-given right to be heard. Their voice speaks to me from the dust. We remember and we honor the past because it allows us to succeed in the future. Someone once said, "Never let your past experiences harm your future." Your past cannot be altered, and your future doesn't deserve the punishment. I am grateful that past negative experiences didn't alter Chief Sagwich's future, because as his direct descendant, it would have altered mine. I have always believed in my mind that the most successful Native Americans today are those who can best balance culture and change. We honor our culture. We honor our people who went before. They're important to us. We honor them and their traditions. But as a tribal leader, I know we live in an ever-changing world. And I think it's my job to make sure our youth are prepared to change and succeed with it. The massacre at Bear River has taught me many lessons in my lifetime. It's taught me that bad things happen to people. If you live long enough, they're going to happen to you. How you respond to those events, though, will determine your character. It has taught me to offer unconditional forgiveness, but it doesn't mean you need to forget. It has taught me that as we preserve history, that everyone's views should be respected and represented. It's taught me that everyone has a story worthy of being told. What is your story? Because your story is as important as mine. And it has taught me that the souls of my ancestors peer out from behind my mask of skin, and that through my memories, they get to live again. Tell me a fact and I will learn. Tell me a truth and I will believe. But tell me a story. That, my friends, will live in my heart forever. Ultimately, the story of Bear River is our story. And in some ways, I hope you can respect the story that we want to have told, as well as recognize your role within that story. You see, history doesn't always affirm us. Sometimes history challenges us to think about an uglier past that we'd rather not have. But that's really the power and the benefit of history. It connects us to the past. It connects us to our humanity and our inhumanity. But it always offers us a way to move forward, especially in something like this, with the Shoshone people, moving forward with you in a way that connects us, not in the prettiest of ways, but to move forward to what I call a new relationship, which I think is a 21st century relationship based on respect. Respect for the truth and what happened in that past moment. Then, and only then, do I think you get the possibility for reconciliation. But how do we make reconciliation possible in a seemingly divided world where Western values teach us that we have individual rights versus Indigenous values that teach us that we have obligations? Obligations to the past, present, and future. Obligations to our communities. You see, Western values, the values that I grew up with and that you're being taught today, they're scientific and skeptical, often requiring proof as a basis for belief. But Indigenous worldviews are based on a spiritually orientated society. This system is based on a belief in the spirit world. To Native people, land, the water, or plants and animals, they're spiritual. Western worldviews tell us that there is only one truth based on science or law. Do you know that Indigenous worldviews say that there can be many truths? Truths are dependent upon individual experiences. Western worldviews has a way of compartmentalizing society. Indigenous worldviews say that societies operate in a state of relatedness. Everything and everyone is related. Identity comes from these connections. Western worldviews say that the land and water and the resources that Mother Earth put here should be available for extraction and depletion to make a dollar. Indigenous worldviews believe that land and water is sacred and is only given to us by our Creator to be carefully and lovingly maintained. Western worldviews judge our success by how well we achieve our goals. Indigenous worldviews judge your success by the quality of our relationships with people and each other. Western worldviews say that human beings are the most important thing in the world. Indigenous worldviews say that human beings are not the most important thing in the world. And Western worldviews teach that amassing wealth should always be done for personal gain. Indigenous worldviews say that amassing wealth is important, but only as it relates to the good for our community. Do you know that the Iroquois Nation don't make any decisions without considering what effect that decision will have on 7 generations ahead? Think about the implications for our future if our leaders govern that way. Take a look around you tonight. We are as varied and colorful as a beautiful field of wildflowers, each bringing with us our own individual characteristics and traits. As you look around, I hope you can truly see the beauty in each other. We need to be able to see through each other's eyes. When this happens, the possibilities are endless. The differences that we all bring to the table can be the strengths that we all draw from one another. Our life has brought us knowledge. Knowledge brings understanding, and greater understanding brings openness to other ways of seeing and being. My grandmother would tell me, don't ever be afraid to forge a new path. It's important for you to remember that nobody is you. That's your superpower. Be the one who celebrates the different colors of our skins and embraces the opportunity that gives us to learn from each other. Be the one who breaks the cycle. If you were ever judged wrongly, be the first one to forgive. If you're ever rejected, choose acceptance. If you were ever shamed, be the one who chooses compassion. Be the person you needed when things didn't go your way, and not the person that hurt you. And always, instead of holding on to a grudge, be the first one to forgive. I think about the values of my native peoples and what lessons of life they can teach us today. I believe they would want us to live as one, to cherish our likenesses, but celebrate the heck out of our differences, to honor our stewardship for this earth and all the things that live on it and the sky above it. They would tell us to have gratitude for what we have and for those who made the trails for us to follow. They would tell us to have reverence in our hearts. They would tell us to spread the kind of love that awakens the soul, that makes each one of us reach for more, that plants the fire in our hearts and brings peace to our minds. That's the kind of love this world needs today. Love, kindness, forgiveness, acceptance. I see you, I hear you, I accept you. Those affirmations and many more like them are what I like to call medicine words. I hope we can speak medicine words to those around us, but especially to our youth. Words that bless, empower, and inspire. Because I believe when we speak medicine words, we build unity. And we strengthen our culture and our communities and our nation. One day at the conclusion of a presentation I did to a bunch of second graders, little girl on the front row raised her hand. And I made the mistake of calling on her. She looked me dead in the eye and she said, "How did you get to be the chief?" Apparently I didn't look chief enough for her. And I told her this story. I said, when a young Shoshone boy or girl does an act of kindness or service, the chief in the tribe would give that boy or girl one eagle feather. I then said to her, what do you think would happen if that boy or girl kept doing kind things? Her answer was obvious. Well, they would get more eagle feathers. I said, what if that boy or girl kept doing kind things until they became an adult? What do you think would happen then? She said, well, by then they would have so many eagle feathers. And I said, you're right. And I said, you know, the chief is always the leader until the day he dies. When that time comes, he usually knows it. He or she usually knows it. And he'll call everybody together. He'll say, I'm about to meet my maker. I need to select a new chief. I want all of you to pull out your eagle feathers and show them to me. It was the person that had the most eagle feathers would become the new chief. You see, the chief isn't the bravest or the toughest or the strongest. The chief is always the one who led a life of service and kindness to those around him or her. So I told that little girl that her classmates, go be a chief. You're not going to be a Shoshone chief. But if you live a life that way, if you're a good sibling and good friend, you're serving people and looking to do kind things for one another, you will become a leader in your community. Leadership that's not rooted in power and authority, but in service, kindness, and wisdom. Heaven knows our world needs that kind of leadership today. But as important it is to tell the story of the people, it's equally, to me, as important to tell the story of the land. But how do you begin to tell the story of the land where cultural and environmental injustices have taken place forever? In 2018, we were able to, as a tribe, purchase all of the Bear River Massacre site. None of the bodies were ever buried. It was January in Cache Valley. The survivors left as fast as they could, didn't return because of the fear of returning soldiers. You couldn't dig a hole. Those bodies are still there today. And in 2018, we were able to purchase 700 acres of that sacred site. That journey that we started in 2018 has just begun. We received funding to take out all the Russian olives, take out all the invasive species and plant new ones. The reality of finally being able to tell our story from our perspective is just so powerful to us. That purchase of the Bear River Massacre site will help our people to reconnect to that sacred space, while giving us a new emphasis as stewards. Voices that have been quiet for more than a century and a half will begin to be heard. And we're just so blessed and grateful to have so many partners that have partnered up in this endeavor with them. You know, the Bear River Massacre is not just a Shoshone tragedy. It's an American tragedy. But in the Shoshone response, our response to that event, I think there are tools that we can all learn to help us heal from the divides that we find in modern day society today. As the story of the massacre and its ramifications becomes better known, I think people will be able to fully recognize the significance in the experience of other people. Their empathy and understanding will grow as they see ways to forgive, to integrate and flourish while protecting your own unique values. As visitors are engaged, I hope they can feel the echoes of the past, helping them to come with terms of some of the choices that they are going to make in the future. We're raising money also to build a cultural interpretive center on the site to tell the story of those people who died that day. That place will be a place of learning, a place of comfort, a place for peace. More than anything else, I think it'll be a place of healing. I don't know if you know much about Chief Crazy Horse, Lakota Sioux. Before he died, he had a dream. And his interpreter wrote down the dream. I believe Crazy Horse was a prophet. I believe he could see our day and time when he said this: upon suffering beyond suffering, the Red Nation shall rise again, and it will be a blessing to a sick world. A world filled with broken promises, selfishness, and separations. A world that is longing for light again. I see a time of 7 generations when all the colors of mankind will gather under the sacred tree of life, and the whole earth will become one circle again. In that day, there will be those among the native people who will carry this knowledge and understanding of all living things. And the young white ones will come to those of my people and ask for this wisdom. I salute the light in your eyes where the whole universe dwells. For when you are at the center within you, and I am in that place within me, we shall be as one. I read that every day. I think they're prophetic, like many Native American leaders that came before, and many Native American leaders who I think will come again. If we're going to have a chance to save this world, I believe we're going to need this wisdom. And in honor of you, I'm going to leave you with a story of anthropology. The great anthropologist, Margaret Mead. She was asked by a student what she considered to be this first sign of civilization in a culture. I think the student expected me to say maybe the discovery of fish hooks or a grinding stone, perhaps. But no, Mead said the first sign of civilization in an ancient culture was a femur bone that had been broken and healed. Mead explained that in the animal kingdom, if you break a leg, you die. You cannot run from danger, get to the river to drink, or eat food. You become meat for the prowling beasts. No animal or human survives a broken leg long enough for the bone to heal. A broken femur bone that is healed is evidence that someone took the time to stay with the one who fell, who bound up their wounds, has carried that person to safety, and has tended that person through recovery. Helping someone else through difficult times is where civilization starts. We are at our very best when we are serving one another. Grateful for the opportunity I've had to come tonight and share my story of the massacre and share just some anecdotes that I think our world needs today. Grateful for you guys to bring me up here. So glad we met. I brought a few books for sale. That's all I had left. There's 18 of them. They're $10. You can Venmo or I take cash, or if you just want one, you have one if you don't have any money. So, but thank you so much. Anybody have any
Do you
questions?
want to take some questions?
I'll take some questions if you have some questions.
Yeah, does anybody have any
If you dare.
questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Could you share with us, please, what's the status of your people today? Are they multiplying? What's your population? Or satisfied?
Well, just quickly, the government, during that massacre period and soon after began signing treaties with natives, moved many tribes to reservations. Treaty of 1863 and 68 at Fort Bridger established Shoshone reservations for Duck Valley and Fort Hall. In 1873, Sagwitch and the survivors ended up being baptized in the LDS Church, all of them. They joined the church. Brigham Young said, "You're not going to a reservation. We're going to create a place for you, and we're going to assimilate you into our culture. We're going to teach you to farm." And so that's what happened to our tribe in 1873. They were all baptized. They created a church farm for us called, we call it Washakie, after the Eastern Shoshone chief. And our people lived there from 1873 to 1960. My dad was born and raised there. So our tribe took a different path. We didn't go to the reservation, which created its own sets of challenges, loss of culture, loss of language. I grew up not on a reservation. I went to public high school. I've never dated a Shoshone woman. And so we're a federally recognized tribe. We only have 550 members. And our blood quantum to be a tribal member is 1/8. But because of that assimilation and marrying non-natives, do the math. I mean, out of the 550, I'd say 400 are 1/4 and 1/8. Well, one more generation, we're not going to have a tribe anymore almost. So unless we lower the blood quantum. And tribes have their own ability to do that. The Cherokee, for instance, have dependency. All you need to prove is you descended from somebody that was Cherokee and you're enrolled. That's why there's 300,000 Cherokee. And the Navajo Nation. In our culture, in our tribe, we have about 6 full speakers. And so they're all over like 80. So do the math. But we have Duck Valley, we have Wind River, Eastern Shoshones. There's 2,000 of them that speak the language. And we've really worked hard on a language revitalization program. We're trying to get our youth to get their nose out of the phones and learn the language. Our kids are like your kids though, so. And so that's the path we ended up taking. And I'm a 6th generation Shoshone Mormon, 6. And I get asked every day, how do you stay? Because the church was responsible for the massacre. They may not have fired a bullet, but they were absolutely the cause. And I told them so. And they still donated a pretty good amount to the interpretive center. So they were our first donors. As they should have been, I think. So, any other questions? Yes.
I just really want to know how you've come to terms with all of that, especially something that was so tragic and whitewashed. I would love to know what your.
I teach Native American history, Utah State University and the University of Utah. I don't know. I don't want to say I'm callous to it, but there are some days that it's hard for me to get through it. And I think I have told this story 5,000 times. Some days it's hard. And especially, I live in the Cache Valley and they're big on like 24th of July, Pioneer Day. And, you know, it becomes hard when sometimes it's rubbed in your face a little bit. And look, I don't want her to apologize, but I'd at least like to acknowledge, you know, the displacement. That would be enough for me. And sometimes we get it and sometimes we don't, but like I said, I'm going to forgive no matter what and just try to move on. But it doesn't mean it's always easy to do that. So, and I'll tell you, I'm the one that suffers when I don't forgive and I hold a grudge and I let it fester and I worry about it and angry. I'm the one that pays the price. So I've just learned to compartmentalize it, throw it in the box and do the best I can to try to move on and spread a message of hope. Sagwitch, I think, I'm more like him, I think, because he was always looking for a way to work together with the pioneers and get along. My grandmother, she was angry her whole life at the church. And she'd tell anybody that would listen. And we have the history of our tribe because of her. She'd gone to boarding school, got educated, came home, got her English degree in college and began writing down all of the tribal history and stories. So because of her, we have just a treasure trove of information and knowledge. But she was very angry her whole life about it. So, and bless her for being that way. It's just not my way.
Darren, can you give us maybe a update on the cultural center and that?
Yeah, as good as I can.
I know you were really delayed by COVID, but
COVID hurt quite a bit. I raised $4.5 million for the building, the brick and mortar building. The original goal was 6, but construction costs over the last few years have skyrocketed. So I think I need about 8 now. The good news is, though, we've raised a lot of money on land restoration. There's a lot of grants out there through USDA and other groups we've raised just almost $7 million in land restoration money. We've taken out almost $500,000 Russian olives. We're taking out invasive plants and species and replanting things that were in my grandmother's plant diary that were used as food and medicine. And I put her plant diary in the appendage in there. So she hand drew these pictures of these plants and said what the uses were for, food or medicine or both. So because of her, we really got a lot of information, but we've been plowing ahead the last 2 years with land restoration, and we're going to plant about 150,000 cottonwoods and willows this spring. We're rerouting Beaver Creek, which the pioneers put in a ditch down the side of the highway. We're going to put it back out into its original channel, introduce beaver in the ecosystem, clean it up to the point that we're working with U.S. Fish and Wildlife and Trouts Unlimited to restock the Bonneville cutthroat trout in that fishery. We're doing a lot of restoration work that will clean up the water and clean up the land, heal the land, heal a place where our people's bones still lie today. So with that, though, starting this summer, we're building a 600-person amphitheater. We've got the funding to do that. And the trail systems that will go down to the hot springs and other places. So while the building might be a year or 2 away, unless you know anybody rich, I'm still working on the funding for the building. But the land restoration, I think we've got enough to complete all of that. So I'm the only fundraiser there is, and so I always forget to raise money. So thank you. Crappy one.
Greg's got a question.
Yeah.
You know, if the Utah daughter of the pioneers would reconsider rephrasing their monument.
Yes and no. I mean, we have our massacre commemoration every year there because it's a big pullout area. And we just had it last January, last week, last Sunday, it was the anniversary. Every time somebody stops there, in fact, we had about 200 people there this year, and it was bitter cold and snow. And every year at the anniversary time, the DUP gets calls from the public saying that's the worst monument ever. A couple of years ago, they contacted me and said, we're catching a lot of heat for that thing. I said, well, have you read it? I mean, and they know. And they said, what about if we put up another plaque? Well, I suggested it years ago with no avail. I said, we could put up a plaque on the backside that tells the story. And actually, that's what they did in 2019. So if you go there, you'll see the front plaque, go around to the back, and there's a plaque on it. They've hidden it, and they said, if you could write the plaque, what would it say? And so I sent them what I would put on it. They included like the first sentence, and that was it. But the first sentence really says it all. It doesn't matter what it says after that, but the first sentence says something like, here in this vicinity, on January 29th in 1863, the US Army massacred over 400 Shoshone men, women, and children. And so the first sentence kind of just completely contradicts everything that's on, well, the front just talks about the soldiers and the pioneer women. So leaves out who died, but the back says it. So, but once we have the interpretive center, that'll be across the street about a quarter mile to the west. I don't know how many people will stop there anyway. You guys have been awesome.
Thank you again.